Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Been talking about long guns for home defense, self-defense for a couple of videos. When I started out as a young cop, you had a sidearm, mostly a revolver back then, and then as a long gun you had a pump action shotgun. And there's really nothing wrong with pump action shotguns even today. So if you live in a state where you're restricted on what you can buy, but you want something more than a handgun for personal defense, say in and around home, let's look at the shotgun and what kind of loads you might need to do a good self-defense job with that. If you're interested in shotguns, stick around. Or if you're interested in the old FUD kind of shotguns, stick around. I'll never forget as a young cop, old man on the range telling me one time, you know, you do that, it'll scare them so damn bad you probably won't have to shoot them. Well, it is a rather unique sound. And if you know what it is, you're familiar with it, it kind of makes you have a moment of pause. So in my police training, revolver or semi-auto, shotgun. But when I got my first full-time police officer job in 1984, I thought, you know, shotguns are okay, but I really think a rifle would be a better all-around patrol partner for a cop than a shotgun. And I based that on my Army time with an M16 or my AR-15 that I own personally. So I kind of headed off towards rifles. I helped start the patrol rifle movement in law enforcement. And I've been focused on that ever since. Now, when I train cops, you always got to come back to the shotgun, because here in Illinois, the shotgun is still an essential part of the basic peace officer training course. After they complete that, then they can go on to become rifle certified from that point on. But we still teach them how to master the shotgun. And for the most part, I'd say still 95% of them probably in their departments are using pump action shotguns. Generally a Remington 870 nowadays. This was an Ithaca. And in my day, the Ithaca probably had I don't know, maybe not half, but maybe 40% of the market. This is a commercial deer slayer model. The military and police version of the Ithacas had this magazine tube extended out to about the end of their 18 or 20 inch barrel. And so you could get another couple rounds in the magazine. They were generally Parkerized finish. But the essentials of this bottom feeding, bottom ejecting action is the same. Ithaca is, I hear they're still in business to some extent with commercial guns, but I think Ithaca is pretty much a thing of the past now. Got this one in high school. The ammunition we fed these in law enforcement, which is ideal for self-defense or home defense, was either Buckshot or Slugs. And I've hunted with Slugs a lot, because up until a couple years ago, you had to hunt deer in Illinois with either a muzzle loader or shotgun firing slugs. And towards the end there, I got into the high-tech slug business, which was sabot rounds, rifled barrels, and things like that. So my old Ithaca has been a safe queen for quite a while. But slugs, in my opinion, are not the best choice for home defense or personal defense. Now, it's not a bad idea to have some available, and you can put them on a buckstock. They're, newer shotguns are built for carrying spare ammo, carrying white lights. There are several semi-auto shotguns that lend themselves perfectly to heavy use, whereas all we had was sporting semi-autos when I started out. So if I were setting up a shotgun and wanting to do a serious shotgun, I'd go with a semi-auto 12 gauge nowadays. I'd have some ammunition side saddles or something to carry spare ammo. So it's worth it to have a couple of slugs to be able to cycle one in if you need that precise shot out to 50, perhaps 100 yards. But for the most part, I think for your self-defense needs, it's buckshot of one type or another. Now, there's always been a topic that some people like to stay away from. Some people have very highly opinionated views of, and I want to experiment with it today and see what we can come up with, and that is birdshot as opposed to buckshot. These are, you couldn't call them duck loads anymore because you got to have steel shot for waterfowl, but this would be like a heavy pheasant load. This is an 1 3/8 12 gauge load of number 5 shot. That was always my favorite pheasant load from a 12 gauge. Up close, these are just going to make a rat hole. All that shot's going to stay pretty much in one mass until it enters the body, and then decide what goes from there. If you live in a populated area, you live in an apartment house, a townhouse or something of that effect, you want minimum penetration. So we're going to look at birdshot and see if it might be a viable alternative for people who live in those kind of conditions. For other folks who don't have to be quite so concerned about penetration problems, then I would say either number 4 buck or double-aught buck. Now, there are other options. When I was with the Illinois State Police, they used to fire single-aught buck. The odd reason they did that is because there were 12 pellets, and 12 fit into their scoring program well. So the rounds they fired of aught buck, you had to count every hole and go up to a possible 100% score. 20 gauge is always an option over 12. You're not throwing nearly as much shot, obviously, but it's generally a lighter weapon and generally lighter recoil. So there are options out there, but today we're just going to play with the 12 gauge and some variations of buckshot. Now, I have not fired, over the course of my career, any federal premium buckshot loads with the flight control wide. But everything I've seen and everybody who's using it nowadays tells me this is it. This will hold tighter patterns from buckshot than almost any load out there. It's a special wad that keeps it together. Little fins pop out at the back, so it slows the wad down from the rear, pulls it away from the shot pattern without disturbing it and knocking those things off to rattle around like a billiards table. So we're going to try some federal premium flight control. Now, this is 12 gauge. I'm shooting all 2 3/4 inch stuff. This is the heavy load at 1325 feet per second with 9 pellets of double-aught buck. They have a lighter load with the flight control that's down around 1100 feet per second, I believe, and possibly even one with just 8 pellets. This is what they had. This is 2024, August 2024. You go to Bass Pro, you go to any of the bigger suppliers, and all you can buy is what they have. They had a lot of empty spaces for federal flight control buckshot on their shelves, but this was the only load they had in stock, and they only had 3 boxes of it. I would go with the lighter load myself. We tested light recoil buckshot and slugs when they came on the market for law enforcement a number of years ago. And smaller statured officers have always had trouble with the recoil of a 12 gauge, especially the heavy magnum level buckshot loads. So just about everyone, I think, Winchester Federal, Remington, they all came out with a low recoil, and some of them would say law enforcement low recoil load with either double-aught buck. I believe you could get it in 4 buck, and you could get it with slugs. And we found that the performance on target, if anything, was even better with the low recoil than the high recoil. The buckshot group stayed tighter, so you got a little bit more reach down range to have an effective load. The slugs were a lot less recoil. And the other thing we were finally able to do at our academy range was we got permission to cut stocks off, because this stock fits me. I'm 5'7". You get much below that, it's pretty long. And by shortening that stock and changing to a limb saver, I believe it's called Sims Labs limb saver recoil pad, you cut the felt recoil almost in half for those small statured people, and they can with so light recoil loads. And this is not, I'm not for lowering standards. This is not really lowering standards. This is just making the weapon fit the user and going at the low recoil stuff, which in our experience performed better than the high recoil stuff. So I think most law enforcement agencies nowadays that are shooting buckshot or slugs are probably shooting the low recoil stuff. As I said, I got the high recoil flight control because that's simply all I could get. So we're going to shoot some standard double-aught buck. We're going to shoot some standard number 4 buck, some low recoil double-aught buck. And different weapons have different favorites. Many years ago, there was a Smith & Wesson dealer, primary Smith & Wesson dealer here in Illinois called Gil Hebard. And he had a small retail showroom, but probably 95% of his business was wholesale. And when I had a gun shop here in Illinois, I bought a lot of stuff from Gil Hebard. I was there one day in the shop, and he had Model 12 Winchester riot guns stacked up in the corners like cordwood. He had made a deal with the Iowa Highway Patrol and traded them. At the time, Smith & Wesson had a shotgun available. Traded them Smith & Wesson shotguns for their old Winchester Model 12s, and most of them were in really excellent condition, and you could pick them up for a song. And I asked Mr. Hebard, I said, those things came with a 20-inch, I believe it was an 18-inch cylinder barrel, no choke, straight pipes, or optionally you could get a Model 12 riot gun with a 20-inch full choke. I said, I don't suppose you got any full choke ones, do you? And he said, I got like 3 of them, and I'm keeping them all. You ain't getting one. So I bought a standard Model 12 riot gun. That was the 12 gauge that I carried in my vehicle when I was a sheriff's deputy out in Wyoming. But before I carried it, I went out and tried it with 2 or 3 different brands of buckshot and some slugs. It did not like double-aught buckshot at all. I mean, that stuff would spread out. At 15 yards, you could barely hold the groups on a silhouette target. For some reason, Winchester number 4 buck, I could keep it on the target out to 40 yards. It grouped it really well. I don't know why. Slugs, it grouped okay, accuracy-wise, but they were about a foot low and about a foot right, because all it had was a bead sight, no rifle sights that I could adjust. So I carried it with buckshot. I wasn't worried about long-range stuff where I would need a slug through it because I had an AR-15 in the vehicle as well. So I had both ends covered. In all the times that we had long guns out of the vehicles with that sheriff's office, the only time I ever took that shotgun was when my job at about 3 o'clock in the morning was to be behind a very dark ranch house while everybody else was serving a warrant going in the front door on a drug raid. And they said, well, we want somebody, you're the new guy, you go out back, and if somebody comes running out the back door, you can shoot them. And I thought, as close as it's going to be and as dark as it's going to be, I'm going to take a shotgun. Every other time I needed some kind of long gun in Wyoming, I pulled a rifle. So you need to get out with your weapons. You need, if you already have one, you need to get out and check the patterning of it with 4 buck, double-aught buck, low recoil, high recoil, flight control wads to really keep those groups tight. So you owe it yourself to do that. Check it with slugs, and if it has sights, sight it in for slugs, and have them as an available option in case you need that more power or the distance and the precision that a slug can offer. All right. Here's another option. You may laugh at a side-by-side double barrel, and obviously they're never going to be my first choice, but they can do a decent job. You have 2 certain shots. You're going to get 2, and you're going to get 2 as fast as any semi-automatic out there. And if you get the hang of it, which I developed in cowboy shooting, we could come up on target, fire 1, fire 2, break it, flick it like that, and I've honed the chambers a little bit so they're nice and smooth. And those empties would usually go flying over your shoulder, and then if you had 2 more in this hand, you could dunk them in, come right back up, and you got 2 more shots. Not an ideal situation, but how often are you going to need a lot of follow-up shots? If you're defending your home with a shotgun, having a double leaning in the corner with a couple of rounds of buckshot in it is going to give you 2 very powerful loads to use against someone inside your home. And then if nothing more, you can drop it to the ground and go to your sidearm. Little story about this one. This is a Ranger It's got a patent date on it. It does not have a manufacturer's name on it. I believe that was the trade name for Sears Roebuck back in the 20s. 100 years ago, 20s. Made by Stevens in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. And Steven made lots and lots of these. I think it's a Model 311. They had a couple of different models. My dad was a construction guy. He was remodeling a lady's kitchen one time, and he called me and he goes, "Hey, this old lady's got an old double-barrel 12-gauge shotgun here that was her husband's, and he's been gone for years and she wants to sell it." And I said, "Well, okay, what is it?" "Well, she says it's a Winchester double barrel." And I'm thinking Model 21, handmade. Woo. "Well, what does she want for it?" $20, and she's got a box of shells with it. And I said, "Well, buy it. You want to see it?" And I said, "Not $20, just buy it." So he brings it. It says Ranger. It's a Stevens 12-gauge, solid. The Winchester happened to be the box of shells that she had for it, so that's where that came from. But for $20, I'm certainly not hurt. Works perfectly, works fine. So, at one point, I moved to Wyoming. I had this old beater shotgun with me that I've never really done much with. And this was a touristy town, and several times during the season they had, you know, railroad days or whatever. So they'd stage shootouts in the downtown for the tourists. So I got recruited to be the deputy sheriff who's going to shoot the guy who comes in, you know, with a pistol in each hand, firing blanks and riding down the street. And I'm supposed to step out and hit him with a shotgun. And I had this whole thing, and I thought, well, it works. And for some reason, I've never seen another Stevens with it. This has a mid-bead. It had a bead on the end of the barrel. It had like 30-inch barrels. But it had a mid-bead. So I go down to the local machine shop, and I said, "You got a real good, clean cut-off saw that, you know, wouldn't burr something up?" "Well, yeah, why?" "So I almost saw these shotgun barrels off." The guy said, "Is that legal?" I said, "Well, as long as they're more than 18 inches, it is legal." And that mid-bead was in there. So I cut them off like 19 1/4 inches or something like that. And that leaves a hole here in between the ribs, which is normally soldered at the very end. But I just mixed up some Brownell's bedding compound with some black in it, you know, and stuffed a piece of styrofoam down in there. So I've got about 1.5 inches of epoxy bedding compound in there, and it's never come out. It seems to work just fine. Now, obviously, this has no choke in either barrel. Chokes are much further out. But we would take 12-gauge shells, and we'd cut them off kind of short. So we'd leave them about that long. We'd fill it completely full of black powder and cut a wad out of like a styrofoam dinner plate and glue it in the front to hold the powder in. And you pull a couple of barrels of this in the downtown business district when the guy's riding by on the horse, and it's really loud and lots of white smoke. So it was pretty cool. That's all I'd ever done with it. Now, cowboy shooting came along later, and this became my cowboy shooting gun, and it worked perfectly for that. For there, you have to use either side-by-sides, either hammerless or hammer, or you can have a hammer type pump action or lever action shotgun. So a Winchester lever or Winchester 97 generally was the most popular of the pumps. But where I lived in Wyoming, there was one creek bottom that was really known for having a lot of pheasants that had been stocked out there years ago. They were wild by now, but they were just thick. And one of the guys that I worked with, my buddy Mark, and he said, "Boy," he said, "that outfitter buddy of yours," he said, "has he got any pheasants out there on Owl Creek?" And I go, "Oh yeah, if they don't have any hunters, we go out there and kill pheasants a lot. Mind if I go along sometime?" So I got permission to take him. And I said, "Well, what we do is we don't have any bird dogs." You know, the one guy had a cattle dog, which would kind of scare pheasants up. They'd start down the creek, and that's where most of the pheasants were. And about 150 yards down there was kind of a natural opening. And I said, we'll usually send a couple guys down in that opening as blockers, and they'll get most of the shooting, because those pheasants will go over them, like pass shooting, you know, what I imagine it would be like shooting driven pheasants in Scotland or England. So Mark was teasing me, and he said, "Well, I think you ought to take that sawed-off double out there and see if you can actually kill anything with it." And I thought about it, and I thought, these birds are going over us at like 40 or 50 feet. These are really close, fast shots. No choke at all would be about right. So I took Old Blue here, and some of those 1 3/8 number 5 shot loads, and the first bunch of pheasants that went over, there must have been a dozen roosters in the first wave. And my buddy has got, 3 shots in a shotgun. He's just pointing everywhere and shooting all 3 shots and didn't touch a feather. But with this whole thing, I just kind of went boom, boom, and knocked down a double. So don't underestimate 2 very certain shots from a sawed-off double barrel. $20 investment, pretty good. Several years later, we had a bunch of seizure guns from various crimes. And sometimes the judge will release those to the original owner. Some he will, just leave the property of the sheriff's office. And in some states, they have to be destroyed, the anti-gun states. But in Wyoming, once they become property of the sheriff's office, we could sell them or trade them or whatever we wanted to do. We had traded for some rifles with a police supplier. And when they came up and looked at the oddball collection of junk we had, they would kind of put a price on everything. And for the most part, they didn't want the kind of guns we had from evidence seizures. So they'd say, okay, well, this one's $100. If one of your deputies wants to buy it, just put $100 in an envelope and it's his. If not, we'll come get him when it's all over. And they had the twin to this. It was Mark Stevens, actually, instead of Ranger. Same model, long, modified and full barrels. There's a spring broken in the lever, so the lever does not stay over. You have to hold it over, and then you have to physically bring it back. I've never bothered to fix it. The price on it was $35. I have a backup to this. Now, those are 2 good, rare finds, but sometimes you can find a solid old Stevens side-by-side shotgun for an amazingly low price. If you want to use it for a cowboy shooter, or just, Stoger makes coach guns. There are other short-barreled guns that you can get out there on the market new, but these are solid old shotguns. They're pretty much bulletproof, and you can saw them off to a legal length, and I think they're kind of cool. But then I'm periodically told that I'm a FUD. So, flight control double-aught buck. These are the heavy recoil version. I'm going to fire this at several distances, and let's see how the group develops as we move back. Kind of give you a maximum range. Double-aught buck, low recoil. Not a flight control wad, just a standard buckshot loading. We'll see how it does. Number 4 buck, again, not a flight control wad, just some standard loadings that I have. Mine all happen to be Winchesters, I guess. And then some Birdshot, 1 3/8 of number 5 shot. Most of these shotguns, social shotguns you're going to get, are going to be no choke at all, so that's a cylinder bore. Some of them will come with screw-in choke tubes, and most of the guys who have experimented with various buckshot loads say you will probably get your tightest groups, longest distance, with a modified choke. Full choke may tighten that small Birdshot cluster down better, but apparently the geometry doesn't work really well with buckshot. Plus, if you go beyond modified, that's getting pretty tight for shotgun slugs. Now, the downside to those screw-in chokes is you have to grease them when you put them in, because if you don't, they will eventually seize in place and you can't get them out. But they will loosen up as you shoot them. So periodically, you got to make sure that's tight, and I mean tight as tight can get. But there's always the chance that that choke tube is going to come out at some point if you fire several shells. I'm more comfortable with a straight barrel that does not have a screw-in choke, and cylinder bore is traditionally been the fighting shotgun choking, so that's what I'm going to experiment with today. So we're going to get started. I'm going to do a kicker to this. I'm not sure if I'm going to get it done this week because I got a little bit of sun right now, but I'm fighting the wind and the storms to try to get this video made. I am also going to use my water jug testing, which gives 95% correlation with 10% gelatin testing. And I'm going to look at penetration. How far do these high recoil double-aught bucks penetrate? How far do the low recoil ones penetrate? And most especially, I want to look at birdshot. I want to hit those jugs back a ways, say 10 yards, 15 yards at the very, very most, and see if that birdshot is going to penetrate deep enough to come anywhere close to that FBI recommended minimum of 12 inches. So it's a potential for really tight living quarters, but I don't think it would be my first choice. But I don't know. So we're going to try the birdshot. We'll try it for both penetration and patterning, and we'll get into that and get some done. Okay, I don't really think I need to do a dual camera setup with me shooting and you seeing what's happening at the target. It's enough to just see what happens at the target. I'll put labels up to show you what's going on. I'll tell you verbally what's going on. And we'll see good distances where this stuff is effective. And then eventually we'll look at penetration and see how well it does. All right, flight control, double-aught buck, 7 yards. All right, flight control, double-aught buck, 15 yards. All right, here's our first shot. This is Federal Flight Control double-aught buck, heavy load at 7 yards. That's 21 feet. That's a pretty fair shot inside of a home. Extreme spread here is under 3 inches any way you want to measure it. So that's a rat hole, folks. Extremely deadly load to 21 feet. Federal Flight Control double-aught buck, heavy load. This is a 9 pellet double-aught buck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 all had to be in there. You notice the wad did not impact, so the wad has shed somewhere between 15 yards and here. Maximum spread looks to be probably about 6 inches any way you want to measure. That's a very, very effective buckshot load. That's at 15 yards, 45 feet. You got a hallway that big in your house, you got an awfully big house. Outdoors, 15-yard shot, still very effective. Okay, this is Federal Flight Control double-aught buck, heavy load, 25 yards. And this will be Federal double-aught buck, Flight Control wads, heavy load at about 35 yards. Here's Federal double-aught buck, Flight Control wads, heavy load. This is at 25 yards. We have a maximum spread here of still about 6 inches. I'm a little bit left of center, but that's still a tremendous load. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pellets. So that's probably outside of any kind of a house. If you live in a barn dominium, I suppose, they could still be within the confines of your building, but 25 yards is a pretty long buckshot shot. 35 yards. Here we see it start to come apart. Okay, we have an extreme spread here of about 14 inches. I'm a little bit left of center again. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's the 9th one right there. That's still on the target. So at 35 yards, especially if I'm centered, that's still going to take it out. That's 105 feet. That's a pretty long buckshot load. I think we're going to find that the conventional without that flight control wad are probably not going to reach out that far. Just to see what happens, I'm going to walk back to 50 yards. This will be a Federal double-aught buck, heavy load, flight control wad at 50 yards. All right, and here is Federal Flight Control double-aught buck, heavy load, 50 yards, 9 pellets. I've got 1, 2, 3 on the silhouette. There's a 4, there's a 5. The others are gone with the wind. So clearly 50 yards is beyond the capability of even flight control double-aught buck load. Low recoil, double-aught buckshot, 7 yards. Low recoil, double-aught buckshot, 15 yards. Okay, low recoil, double-aught buckshot. I believe it was Federal. It's a 9 pellet load. This was at 7 yards. 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, they're all in there. There's 9 there. Plus, of course, the big hole made by the wad. Nice centered load. Devastating load at 7 yards. Extreme spread. About 5 inches, almost perfect. Now here's just moving back to 15 yards. All right, we've got extreme spread of about a foot, 12 inches, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All the pellets are there. No wad showing as impact, so it's stripped off and falls off very quickly in recoil. That's a really good load. 15 yard, nice centered load. That's low recoil, double-aught buckshot from a straight pipe, cylinder bore. Okay, this is low recoil, double-aught buck, 25 yards. Okay, this is low recoil, double-aught buck, 25 yards, cylinder bore, so no choke. Looks like we have an extreme spread of about 21 inches. We got one pellet hole over here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So at 25 yards with a decent center hole, and I must have drifted a little bit left, we're not going to keep them all on that silhouette target. That's the limitations of buckshot. And each of these, if they go through the wall and they hit that little innocent 3-year-old girl in the next apartment, or if you're outdoors and you miss and hit someone down the street, each one of those has a little lawyer attached to the back of it. You're responsible for those pellets, and you're responsible for what damage they might do. So even 25 yards is going to be maximum effective range, probably more like 20 yards maximum effective range for low recoil buck. Number 4 buckshot, 7 yards. Number 4 buckshot, 15 yards. Okay, number 4 buckshot, 7 yards. This is not a low recoil load. It's a standard intensity load. You can probably tell by the recoil and the sound. We got an extreme spread of about 9 inches. A lot of pellets. Double-aught buck, the loads we've been using are 9 pellet loads. They're approximately 33 caliber for each load of every buckshot pellet. Number 4 buck at 15 yards. I keep drifting a little bit left here. So I've got a couple of off, but if I were centered better, I'd say this at 15 yards, this would be an effective load. It would stay on the target. This number 4 buck load has 27 pellets, and they are approximately 24 caliber, so smaller diameter, 24 instead of 33, but 3 times as many of them. That would be a devastating load at 15 yards. You got a couple here you need to be responsible for, so I'd say probably 15 is going to be close to the limit. Birdshot, 7 yards. Birdshot, 15 yards. Birdshot, 3 yards. Okay, I recycled this 15-yard birdshot target and gave it the same load, 1 3/8, number 5 shot at 3 yards. That's a rat hole. That's a nasty, fatal wound. 3 yards, 9 feet. That's across a very small room in your house. Okay, folks, there's the pattern testing. As far back as 50 yards with a flight control wad. Here's one of these flight control wads, just to the back end, so you can see as it goes down the bore, these pop out at the back, pulls that wad off of that shot column of double-aught or number 4 buck, and then allows it to continue in a much tighter pattern than the standard double-aught buck we saw. So I would say double-aught buck flight control, and I shot the heavy load, I'd say it's workable to about 35 yards. Didn't test number 4, didn't test the lighter recoil version of it. It's just simply not available that I can find right now. But you're going to need to test this yourself and see the range of your gun with your load. Number 4 buckshot, back to 15 yards. Double-aught buck low recoil, maybe to 20 yards. Birdshot, which I never really tested, at 7 yards, I don't think it's a great idea unless those pellets are going to penetrate very deep, which I'll have to check later in water jugs. I got a storm brewing back up again. At 3 yards, devastating load. That's only 9 feet. I mean, if you got a 12 by 14 bedroom, that's within the confines of your bedroom. If you got to go in the hallway, you got to go outside your house, I just don't think birdshot's an answer. If you're concerned about penetration, I would go with number 4 buckshot. I will test number 4 double-aught and double-aught out of the flight control in the water jugs and give you an estimation of how it's going to penetrate in people. FBI recommends 12 to 18 inches for handguns. I'd say 12 to 15 inches should get you by with buckshot, but we'll shoot some jugs when we have a chance and we'll find out what happens. Shotgun can be a viable self-defense long gun. With buckshot, the range is very limited. With slugs, you can reach out further, but inside of a building, you got a heck of a penetration hazard. The shotgun's not ideal. I still think a carbine is the way to go. Unfortunately, some states, carbines are going to be hard to get your hands on now. So if you can't get an AR-15, how about a Mini 14? How about a Mini 30? How about an SKS? How about an M1 carbine? If you've got an old M1 Garand, they're heavy, but they hit hard. Think about self-defense, folks. I'm going to show you a little clip here at the end. Updated information on the Chinese immigrants we have coming into this country. You need to be prepared.
Is the border, as you've talked about, because across that border we are seeing Chinese soldiers come across. And really what we're talking about is China putting together the infrastructure in the U.S. to attack the U.S. So clearly we've got to secure that border or we're going to be fighting on our own soil.
Well, it's just incredible to me that this administration refuses to acknowledge all these Chinese nationals that are coming through the border. They're creating a little mini army, and I'm wondering what the point is here. Are they trying to put people in place, I'm talking about communist China, so that when and if Donald Trump wins, they can create havoc in the streets and become saboteurs, starting wildfires and propaganda?
Absolutely. That lab in Reedley, California, the secret Chinese biological weapons facility, that can't be the only one that China has. And then you put together these images of recent Chinese migrants coming into the U.S. less than 3 weeks, taking target practice with sniper rifles and pistols. So really what we have here is the makings of a Chinese army, not in China, but in the United States.
Thank you for watching these videos. I appreciate you subscribing. See if you need to resubscribe, because YouTube is YouTube. Give me a thumbs up if you like this stuff, and by all means leave me comments. Even comments that are negative, I learn from. So by all means do that. Folks, stay safe out there. Thank you.
Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.